There is a conflicting brilliance to Fez. It's undeniable that the game is important. As the poster child for the indie revolution, it is a go-to example of small-scale development's evolution into a significant contender to the AAA throne. And it's a game that I have a strong personal attachment to, one that has drawn me back to replay it more than any other game in my life. This is all for good reason. It's a gorgeous game, packed with personality, with an incredibly engaging central mechanic, one that constantly changes up the way you use it to navigate the various game worlds. And it's full of secrets, meaningful, complex interactions with the environment that make use of every square inch. But it's also a game that has brought me, and no doubt many others, a great deal of frustration. As good a platformer as it is, there's this somewhat problematic second layer, hiding what I consider to be unfair design in obfuscation. Fez ultimately is a game that is clever, but not smart. Polytron's perspective-bending puzzle platformer goes to great lengths to hide its true identity, presenting front and centre the face of a charming collectathon. And that's what it is for a number of hours. Pick up cube shards, pick up cubes, navigate the world using one of the worst in-game maps I've ever had to deal with. I mean, Jesus, look at this chaos. But quickly, environmental clues and unusual scripts point to something deeper happening in the landscape. The world logic starts to warp, and only the keenest of eye will clock onto the secret language that powers Fez's secondary puzzle layer. A language that transforms plucky, behatted protagonist Gomez from an explorer to a cryptographer, moving the game on from being just a platformer with a neat central mechanic to something that restructures a once passive form of interactivity into something central to the game's identity, making perspective swapping not only the solution to environmental navigation, but an input method too, is a sly nod to the era of cheat codes, tapping into a player's cultural memory in a dastardly hidden manner. Only it's never really felt quite right to me. For all the bells and whistles and blindingly clever, astute puzzle design, I've always left a solution feeling angry rather than smart. In order to figure out what was wrong, I first had to ask, what makes a puzzle good? And to be perfectly honest, there's no one fixed answer to this. Talking to Marsh Davies for Rock Paper Shotgun in 2015, Jonathan Blow said that puzzles were an art, not a science. But he also stated that a puzzle should know what the point is, what it's trying to illustrate to you. It should know what's necessary to create that illusion and what's not, and in most cases it's best to remove everything that doesn't contribute to that, because you get a smaller, lighter, more beautiful thing that becomes more effective. Davies himself states that a puzzle is not a problem, it is in partnership with the player to reach its own solution. A problem is just an obstacle, impassive and possibly insurmountable. Mike Bithell put it a lot more succinctly, describing good puzzles as being comprehensible challenges which accurately chart player learning and encourage creativity, something you can see clearly in his own puzzle platformer Thomas Was Alone. And Tom Francis, the man with a seemingly limitless amount of brilliant insight into game design, talks of the highs and lows of puzzle games in a blog post from 2013, citing puzzle fatigue as the result of a shift in the game's balance between how interesting this is to me and how much work it is to play. Whatever your poison, it's clear that the mantra running across these ideals is that a good puzzle is like a conversation. It engages with the player in a way that encourages them, rather than acting like a brick wall. It's not that a puzzle should bellow its own solution to the player. It's important to create something that taxes your audience, as that's where satisfaction lies. But challenge and obfuscation are, in my mind, mutually exclusive. So what is it exactly that Fez gets wrong with its puzzles? It makes them needlessly complicated, introducing alien input methods without effectively signposting what they are. And it forces the player to swim upstream to figure out stuff that could easily sit in a menu with minor impact to the experience. Whether it's juggling two separate cryptographic scripts while hiding the tool for their use, relying on haptic clues that aren't universal depending on which platform you play on, or the simple fact that you have a Navi adjacent that tells you absolutely nothing of use. There are a lot of small niggles that stop Fez's puzzle layer from feeling truly satisfying. But there is one significant outlier that hammers this point home, and that's the black monolith. Thought of as Fez's final challenge, the black monolith was considered by many to be unsolvable, a conundrum that combined cryptographic analysis with left-field problem-solving to produce a solution that, so far, no one has been able to arrive at organically. The story of the black monolith begins in a solitary room, with the visual cues unseeable in all but the third dimension, something unattainable until you finish the game for the first time. Seeing the puzzle in the first place was cryptic enough, but what do its symbols signify? And how would one go about solving it? The only solid clue lay in a mysterious tome found in a faraway place, the markings on its cover resembling those on the floor. Inside said tome are pages of a codex, purportedly designed to help players translate the ancient language of Fez's first civilization, although it was quickly ascertained that the tome itself was the hallway to an even more cryptic translation. But thanks to the power of the internet, it actually wasn't that long before a solution of sorts was found. 5 days after launch, in fact. A solution attributed in part to two game designers, Peter Silk and Trey Rea, as well as the manpower of the online hive. It was in the practices and methodology of code breakers, not the game's own logic, that the vault of knowledge started to become less impenetrable. In particular, Simon Singh's The Code Book is cited for the idea of using educated guesses as a starting point for deciphering. In the case of the Black Monolith, the educated guess was the word hexahedron, a term that crops up numerous times throughout the game. It took a lot of ingenuity and pooling of resources to finally unlock what was inside the Black Monolith. One enthused explorer even created something called a De Broglie graph application to test tens of thousands of potential solutions. And finally, after 18 hours and approximately 66,000 attempts, the code was cracked. Out popped an innocuous heart piece, numbers added to the completion percentage, and Fez's final unsolvable enigma was beaten. Even with this solution to hand, many have been left scratching their heads as to what exactly they were supposed to do to solve it properly. There were countless theories as to what the solution was in reference to. Was it linked to the game's release date? A cheeky reference to 2001: A Space Odyssey? Or did the answer lie in an explanation of the fourth dimension by Carl Sagan? With no confirmation from Polytron about the exact nature of the Black Monolith, all we are left with is a series of ideas. Ethan Gack, who wrote about the phenomenon for Kotaku back in March, put it best. It's a theory that benefits a bit too generously from already knowing the precise details of what it's supposed to be theorizing. This is my biggest problem with Fez, and in particular the designer of its puzzles. There's an air of arrogance around the Black Monolith, a sense of its design centering around its creator's ego to the detriment of the player. It's as if the primary directive wasn't to create a taxing and memorable riddle to act as the final challenge in an already quite tricky game, but for the Black Monolith to be a, well, monolith to the intellect of its progenitor, and in the process it breaks what I consider to be fundamental rules of puzzle design. There's more to this dilemma, because in spite of this troubling itch, if you ask me what I would change were I at the helm, I'd probably say nothing. For all of my grumbling, the Black Monolith achieved something that I don't think it would have done were it a conventional riddle. It brought people together. It was something said by Trey Rea that made me realise that a puzzle can have value even if it isn't good. I think the intensity of idea exchange and collaboration within the community was the climax of the game's experience, he said of the Black Monolith's denouement. Having turned what could have been a very negative and insulting experience for most players who put a lot of effort into the game's back nine into a positive one. The communal experience of banding together against extraordinary odds is something that cannot be manufactured. It appears organically, in the seams between intent and outcome. and it is fueled by that eternal passion, the drive to understand the unknowable. And in that moment, in the space between, something brilliant and memorable was born, something that would not have existed if Phil Fish had not been such an irritating savant. And that is why I love this frustrating, beautiful game.